Hi, I'm Brandon. This is episode 2 of Bowie's Final Strike, a return to the Yu Yu Hakusho TCG. Um, Today, I got my buddy Bryn back with me, and we are going to talk about, we got our cards, and kind of what we decided to build for our first decks, what set we were decided to like kind of use as like our opening one, like hey, we're gonna play up to this, and that was Dark Tournament. um and Bryn, what were your kind of like takes on you remembering like why we picked Dark Tournament to be like our starting point for jumping back into this card game?
Yeah, so we touched on it a bit in the first episode, where when we looked at the cards in general, and the first idea was just that we'll use all the cards we have available to us up through Alliance. And it didn't take long just looking at some of the characters and drastically power creep they got, that we wanted to limit that and try to restrict that power creep as much as possible just to enjoy the game. And at this point, we weren't really looking to balance the game or quote unquote fix the brokenness of the game. We just wanted to use a couple of sets of cards that played well together.
Mm-hmm.
And we first two were probably the most underpowered, plays well together. And I think a lot of what we based it on was simply just looking at the characters.
Mm-hmm.
The defense and out of hand, the attacks were fairly on par with each other. And it just gave us a bit of diversity with the decks, or at least the teams that we could build. Whereas if we got stuck with just Ghost Files, that we were really restricted. So
Yeah,
I put up front, just trying to say what is a low power environment that we can use some teams that we like.
I think that was always the big thing for us, was wanting to use the teams that we enjoyed. um, that's always been it, and to our detriment at some points in this game, because some of the teams we want to play just die after a certain point. At least it feels that way.
Yeah.
But you didn't touch on this, but I would say at that point too, like it really came down to like obtainability of the cards as well, right? Like uh,
That too.
Dark Tournament, like felt like okay, we can get these cards in a couple of weeks. That's being generous, maybe on some of them, because I remember for a while cards like Demonic Tricks and stuff like that seemed like they just weren't popping up, and we weren't able to find them, and like being like, man, I want to play set of this. Um, so there was some outliers of that. Halt, trying to find halts that, and that's one of those cards. I don't want to go too much into the financial aspect of it here, but it was like one of those cards where it was like one day you find it for $10. The next day, the only one I could find was for somebody selling it for 30, and I was just not going to buy it. Like, so um, that was one of those cards that became difficult. I mean, even worse than that was Demonic Tricks, though, for sure, right? Like, there was times we saw Demonic Tricks for like $7, $8, and then there was times where like we seen them posted for like we still needed copies at that point, and I think we were seeing them at like $45 for a Demonic
Yeah.
Tricks.
Yeah. And no, that's such a good point to bring up because I held off building my favorite team in the whole game, specifically because of even a dark tournament. There were a few cards that I didn't think I was ever going to find enough to put into a deck. Demonic Tricks was one of them. Definitely leaned me into building a hero deck rather than a villain deck. But also Orbs. Orbs of
Yeah.
Voss. Like, I. And it's funny, I want to touch on this, and I know we'll touch on this when we get to later formats, but this was in that weird separation between us remembering how we played in the past, but learning about some of these new cards that existed. And you had brought up meditation, energy releases. We didn't know about those, and that was part of the reason we did dive into gateway format right
Mm-hmm.
away because those we knew that those were going to be a staple, and we had to take time to build those up. But even I held off on Eurotogi. That's the deck that is always was my favorite. It still is my favorite. But I held off on that because once I learned that Orb was even a card, I'm like, well, how do I build this deck now, knowing that that card exists and it feels like such a shoe in for the deck?
Yeah, that's true. Uh, Orb was brutal for us to track down, for sure. I remember just having the one and just being like, "Oh my gosh, I have one of this card. That's amazing. That's probably all I'm ever gonna get." And we were both lucky enough to have at least a play set of them now. Um,
But
but speaking of that, like, what was the when we started this back up and we were playing? I mean, I'll talk about mine too, but um, what was the deck that you went with? What was the first one you built? Was that Uratogi? I can't remember.
it wasn't. I wanted to do that deck justice, or at least my version of what I thought what a good version of it would be. So I held off on Uratogi because I didn't have the orbs, and I didn't feel good about proxying them. I know we talked about that; we were
Mm-hmm.
okay with it, but I just didn't want to if I didn't have to. So I actually went Urameshi, and a good part of that too was because I didn't have demonic tricks either, but I had Botan's healings, and that felt like it was going to push me a bit more in the hero direction. I also remember coming across a card Confrontation from Dark Tournament, and it's specifically referencing if your team's a hero, and it was just one of those cards that at the time with the limited card pool, I'm like, this seems like a really strong card. It's cool that I get to use this if I'm leaning to a hero deck. And I think I've mentioned this to you too, but one of the big factors was I had found from my old collection my Yoko the Spirit Fox.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might still be my favorite looking card in the entire game. Even as basic as it is, it's just something about that. I just always was in awe with how cool it looks. So I was like, I get to use this now in my main lineup rather than
That's
having it.
it is such a cool card. I'm not gonna deny that. It's just such a cop out to say that that's the best looking card because it's like everybody's favorite. But
Sure.
yeah, I forgot it was that Urameshi deck that you built, and I just remember it like it was annoying, and it didn't feel like it had a real identity at that point, which was weird because it ran a lot of things that like just kind of made it function and it functioned fine, but it didn't really like I it was so different than the deck that I built to begin with. I mean, I'll talk about that then, but it was just like for being the main, you know, protagonist deck, I kind of felt like in Dark Tournament, I was like, well, what's the like win con of this deck? Like, what is the strategy around building this? And it was still just fine, but it didn't really feel like it had an identity.
Yeah, that was my biggest problem with the deck, and it's what eventually led me to kind of scrapping it in favor of some other decks later down the road. Is they have such a strong team bonus. I can't deny that. Getting the extra spirit energy so you can play your cards is huge, especially back in Dark Tournament. Some of your best cards are still kind of high spirit cost. It's not till later in the game where some of the good cards just drop to zero spirit energy. And then, I don't think at the time we really faced Mill. I don't think you had your Mill deck built just yet, but their team bonus just giving you a little extra recursion as you're going through to survive Mills, pretty
Mm-hmm.
great too. And they just have good characters. I'm talking about Yoko again. Dark Tournament, 5,500 defense is top of the line. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
and that
He
sideline
was,
ability.
well, that too. One of the few good sideline abilities in Dark Tournament because there weren't any in Ghost Piles.
Mm-hmm.
So it just had that to pull from. He the Stern was a Dark Tournament one, and at that point, being able to discard from your opponent's hand with both the attack, I believe, does it, and his ability does it. So just having access to those, and then he's best suited as a fifth character, but Yusuke Unleashed fits the bill too.
Yeah, that's the
But
one. So two things that I'm going to stop you from because we didn't talk about it, and I think it's one of the funniest things that we've encountered. Um, but I'll start with the not so funny one. I think one of my biggest problems with the Urameshi in Dark Tournament is that the Yusuke is best suited as a fifth character for just about any deck, right? Like that's what we kind of really found out there. Like, oh yeah, he's like your go-to fifth character for just about any deck. at that point in the game. And it just one of those things that really flavor wise bothers me, I guess, is that he's like not on the he's not a main lineup character. Um,
Oh,
which I hate that. I hate that, and I think that's really poor planning on that uh, for the card game. But the one thing that I did want to talk about that I find hilarious, and I actually forgot about it until we were just talking about these characters, and I think that is what's really cool about Urameshi is they have Yoko, they have that Hiei the Stern who at that point seems pretty good, but the one person we haven't talked about yet, Genkai the Young Fighter.
that was the last one I was gonna bring up. That was
You know,
that was almost the same thing as Yuritogi. I almost didn't go Urameshi for the same exact reason.
I think it was so funny because nobody here knows this unless you've seen me asking for cards in the Facebook group or in various different places. But I love Genkai. Um, she's one of my favorite characters, and I was not building Urameshi, but I wanted that Genkai um, just to have the card. And I, as crazy as it was at that time, I remember looking for that in the beginning when we were looking for cards, and there was only one on eBay, and some guy wanted like $275 for it or something, and it was posted there for like ever. And I remember I would like ask around, asking all these people, "Hey, anybody got a Genkai the Young Fighter?" And nope, nope, nope. And um, which is weird. It's just such a timing thing, right? Like sometimes you're trying to find a card and nobody has it. Nobody will sell it to you. Nobody will trade you for it, and it's like crickets. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, it's like somebody's got like eight of the card. Um, but back then, I remember that guy had it for posted for like $275 or something like that. And if he's watching this, I'm sorry, but I'm not really either, I guess. But $275, and I remember I was like asking him, and I would like shoot him a message on eBay, and I was like, "What do you really want for that Genkai the Young Fighter?" And he was like $275, and I'm like, "Where did you come up with that?" And I got into like this thing with this guy of like, "How is this worth like?" How do you think that this is the value you're going to get to his card, and how it's just going to sit there, and he should at least just sell it to me for a reasonable price so somebody can actually make use of it before it just decays into the ground as paper. Um, but I remember I ended up finding one. I can't remember. There were so many like deals I made back then in the beginning, but I did get one, and I was like thrilled. And I remember I was like, I can't believe we even got this card. That's how different things are now, right? Like I was like, oh my god, I can't believe I have this Genkai the Young Fighter. I don't think we're gonna find another one. And I remember we couldn't find another one. And but there was on eBay, what was it? Spirit Pack 2s.
Well,
And
yeah, it was Spirit Pack too.
did you get those from Elkenrod at that time? I can't remember.
I don't know. I don't know who they came from.
I can't remember if you got them from Elkenrod or not. But you went on there, and how many packs did you buy? Was it two?
No, I think it was.
Yeah.
I bought out everything they had for it. It was one listing, but they had multiple. And I just bought. I think it ended up being four.
And I remember you got them, and you're like, I got the packs in the mail, and like I was like, well, don't open them until you like FaceTime me, basically. And you opened them up, and I think it was like the first pack. I mean, it was only a tournament rare, but it was like you got the Genkai, the Young Fighter, and we were both like, "This is insane. This is ridiculous." Which is kind of funny thinking back on now, but it gives you an idea how desperate we were to find the cards that we were looking for. Um, so that's just what I wanted to bring up about Urameshi. Um, and then I guess the deck that I started off with, which was no surprise, is I wanted to build Tagoro, and thinking how awesome it was going to be, and things have changed a lot since then too, but one of the things that I think is was such a barrier, and I don't know how this happened. I don't know how the I don't want to call him the main villain because that changes depending on what arc you're in, but the iconic villain that most people at least have seen because it was on what was it, Toonami, and that's what they kind of showed up with through Dark Tournament, and that's it. So if you didn't know anything else as a really big villain for Yu Yu Hakusho, you knew Toguro, and just boggles my mind thinking that they really didn't make great Toguro characters throughout those first two sets, right? Like you have just a vanilla like Bowie with from the starter deck who's 5,000 defense, 2 for 7,000, and you're kind of like, okay, I'll run this maybe because I think it's depending on what way you're building the deck, it's probably better than the Bowie from Dark Tournament, but in some regards not. It was very weird. And then your other characters are, how does a ghost from Spirit Detective Toguro, who is like my absolute, I love the Latent Warrior. I love that card, and it just seems so bad. And I remember for the longest time, like putting different versions of that Toguro deck together, and basically always coming back to the conversation with you of, well, maybe you need to take younger Toguro out of the lineup. And I'm like, how can I? It goes back to what I said about like Yusuke. Like, I'm like, how am I going to build a Toguro deck that doesn't have younger Toguro in it? This just seems ridiculous. And took me a while to like kind of give into that idea. Um, and it's gone through changes, and I still don't have it, built the way I will think is probably the most effective. But I tried to do things, and I know you have like the transformed, and he's got great defense for Dark Tournament, 6,000, but he's got that attack. What is it? Shockwave, 4 for 9,000, is it? And it's discard all face down attach cards. And the other one is what, 1 for 6, but you have to discard a face down attach card to use it. Um, and I was not really sold on him at that point. Um, but just really thinking of like, man, like, and the characters are bad, and like look at the Mad Bomber, like discard 6 cards for self destruct, and it does, what is it, like a 1,000 damage, but then like it does like 2 points of damage or something like that. I don't know, but I just I know it was bad, and
You left out
I left out what?
Sakio.
And Sakio, yeah, the Sakio that is useless, and like it was so weird because I remember like having the deck and like putting the lineup out when we played for that first time and just being like, oh, we got like I got a whole like lineup of starter deck characters at this point, even though there was other characters. It seemed goofy. Um, like Karasu seems like from the starter deck seems like one of the better characters because at least he's just 1 for 4, shuffle 5 items back in. He kind of gives you some recursion, and he's got at least another attack at 2 for 6. But it was all just like very vanilla cards. And I know like in building that, went to like all events, right? That was like the way that I tried to do that, and that was just from like the only information that I could find. I remember seeing like oh, okay, well, like just run a whole bunch of events because singing potential at that point is like what, it has the potential to be the biggest attack increase you're gonna get out of a single card. You discard 5 events and it's 5,000. So that seemed like good, and rash brawlings and Flux, all that kind of stuff, and just trying to pump and then using the team bonus, which I think in Dark Tournament feels pretty good. Um, it was one of those things though, like, you know, as we tried to play other formats, like getting into other ones, it really felt like it was like as the game goes on, Tagoro just gets like the bonus just becomes weaker and weaker, where it feels kind of good in Dark Tournament. It's as you get to more and more packs, like so many cards do the same thing that it felt kind of bad. But that was my take on Tagoro and playing it. Is just feeling like it really was just like fun because I loved Tagoro and I wanted to play that deck so bad, but I was just so mad that like I was just like, man, like I can't run the characters that I would even want to run in this. Um, and I think one of my biggest things was is like we talk about it still, and even in Gateway, and you know even in Dark Tournament, like you're like, oh yeah, you're just gonna overwhelming kill with this deck, and like you really realize like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but like that's a lot of cards a lot of the time. You know, discarding for the bonus. They don't have the Elder Togoro on your sideline, the indestructible by that point to keep drawing you a free card every turn. Like one of their biggest things, and like that was my complaint with the event every one is just how many resources you're spending every turn to do an attack and make it hit. Whereas compared to some of the other decks, just didn't have that concern. But I know I've gone back and forth and trying to figure out how to make that deck the best I can make it for how long now, and I don't think it's ever going to be like complete, you know. But at least I think it's enough to play it um, and be fun. But like double teaming is a big help. At least if you run the Tagoro from Dark Tournament or the Bowie from Dark Tournament, put them later in your sideline. They got that 9,000 you can add, which is nice. Um, but that was my experience with Tagoro. And if anyone out there has any, you know, suggestions on really an optimal way to build that, I'd be all ears to hear compared to what I have. Um, but on top of that, Brittany, then I guess, you know, we talked about Urameshi a little bit, but you kind of quickly moved on from that and went to another team. And that is when I think you finally were like, okay, I'm going to build Uratogi, right?
Yeah, you had touched on, and I didn't really explain it too much, but you were right. Urameshi felt like a deck with good characters, a good bonus, but without a purpose. And you know that gets you far enough. Like you said, the deck did fine, but that's not enjoyable to me. I like when my deck kind of feels like there's pieces clicking together and it's doing something. And up to that point, it just kind of felt like I was running the best of what was available, but without a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, by this point, I think we were far enough along now where I would have been able to pick up my orbs, which, I mean, just for people listening, like, this didn't happen in a week or a couple of weeks. Like, we probably stuck with these decks and in Dark Tournament for a good month or just a couple months, really.
Yeah.
That's how long it took to get them. But finally, when I got orbs and I had my playset, that was when I was like, well, I'm going to Uratogi now. This is the deck I wanted to build when we got back into this.
Mm-hmm.
And I switched to them, and it was just such a different experience because now, you know, their team bonus is very control heavy. It's limiting your opponent's hand size. It's limiting how low their hand can go when they're attacking. And now that I had orbs, I could make you have to discard just to play an event. And it's very controlling, which is not the norm for me. I don't think any other card game I'm excited to say I'm the control player. That's just not something I like. But in this game, I don't know what it is about the team, but it clicks with me.
Yeah, and I think, you know, after you kind of built that deck, is when I really got into the notion that I hate Uratogi, and for good reason because I was still completely focused on Tagoro, and that's when you got the great little card called Freak Show. That was just like the bane of my existence, and it felt like an auto loss. Like first turn, we, you know, if I even if I go, you know, first or second, if I got, you know, 4 cards in hand or whatever, and or at any point in the game, just to lose your entire hand, but for is death to Goro at that point, right? Like you don't have anything to discard. You don't really have any real ways to draw outside of Kitty Love and Burst of Power and Kurama's Last Stand. So
at that point, yes, because we didn't quite make some changes that were coming down the line.
Yep. But yeah, that's when I really began to hate them because Freak Show. And I think that's one of the more interesting things about Dark Tournament is all those different cards that have the little. If your opponent has the so and so team bonus, and they all seem like extra, like completely ridiculous effects, right? Like,
oh, there's so many that are just. That second half is overpowered. Like one, I think mills for 10 cards.
That's the Ichigaki one.
Which 10 cards is a lot of cards.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that I think is it the one for Serioski versus Genkai? I think he just randomly healed 2 points of damage or something like that.
Something like that.
The bonuses are just absurd. One I think lets you draw 3 cards. It's probably the one that he's out on St. Beast or Yuritogi.
Well, yeah, so I was going to say, I don't know which is the best, but I guess it really depends on what you're playing and how it's going. But man, oh man, as just a general card, I don't think any of them stand up to Entrapment. Maybe not in Dark Tournament because how many? What are you gonna get as a technique?
Death Tree.
Death Tree.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like outside of that, there really wasn't anything you'd really like exciting to get. But as soon as Gateway comes around, that changes. But Entrapment, search your deck for a technique, gain 3 spirit energy. If your opponent has the same beast team bonus, draw 3 cards.
Yeah, that is one of the cards that just scaled with the game.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll never truly experience that card in the way that it was in the true Alliance format.
Yeah. Which
is a good thing. I never want to, but that card played a role into essentially first turn killing.
Yep.
It's that good. But we got to talk about too. Freak Show, I think, is the only card in the entire game limited to 2 by just.
Yeah, we had that conversation the other week where I was like, when you're like Freak Show is limited to 2, I'm like, what? And I started thinking about it. I was like, I think that's the only card in this game limited to 2. Which is awesome. I mean, it's just a good card on its own, but if it just absolutely wrecks Togoro, it's just like I said, it's like an auto loss. But we kind of jumped ahead, which was fine because we talking about all those like specific bonus cards and stuff like that. But kind of like talk about Yuritogi a little bit more and kind of how you felt about it after kind of putting it together and what was going on with it.
So Yuritogi, I think, was the first time that I started to lose a little bit of the hype that I had on Dark Tournament format as a whole. And I was a big proponent of it going into it. I know you and I had talked about what set do we want to stop at. And I was really on board with Dark Tournament. I think I tried to compare it to GOAT format from Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is just this underpowered, low card pool format. But in Yuritogi, building it, and I wanted to make it this cool, synergistic deck. It's focused on discarding cards from your opponent's hand and limiting that. I really started to feel the pressure of a small card pool.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so many cards that interact with your hand. There's no payoffs for interacting with your hand because at that point, outside of Freak Show, which is limited to, everyone I'm playing is either a 1-for-1, I play the card, you discard a card, or I play it and I discard a card to make you discard 2. So at this point in the game, there's nothing I'm doing where I'm like getting ahead of the opponent.
Yeah.
And quite at Gateway format yet, where the winner circle cards come into play, and I get a bonus for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just discard to discard. That's it. And most of my deck is still falling back on the same old Spike Clubs. If I really feel like I need it, there's Broomstick. If you want to go no Spirit Energy, Backyard Dummy.
Well, that's for rookies, man. You got to go at least Ice Blade.
I didn't have that in Katana for a while.
Yeah.
I really started to feel the pressure because I was looking at my deck and we were still forcing, at least I was, to have a 40 card deck, which shame on us. We can talk about a whole episode probably on deck size, but well, forcing 40 card because my brain is, well, the game says it can be 40. The lowest number is always the most optimal. And I'm just, like 30 of the cards are just the same cards I had in Urameshi. They're the same cards you have in Tagoro.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, 10 cards that I'm adding in for Uratogi don't make it feel different, don't make it feel special. And I'm not getting rewarded for playing.
Yeah.
So just talking about the deck as a whole, I tried to make it control-y. And I liked what it was. But it was at that point that I realized I would like a bigger card pool to really lean into that strategy and get rewarded for doing so.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you your deck at that point?
What was that?
How did you feel about your deck at that point? Like looking at just Dark Tournament card pool?
I was kind of just like the same thing you said in regards to like, okay, like things are starting to feel more the same, like same cards, like we're all running the same cards and we're all running, three halts, we're all running burst of power, we're all running Karama's last stand, we're all trying to recuperate. I mean, those are all staples throughout a lot of the game, so I'm not going to say that, but like just in regards to like what do you have as far as items, what do you have as far as techniques. I mean, I guess going back to entrapment, there was, which I think is still one of my favorite techniques or best techniques, like in playing with it at all, is that desperate assault. 0 for 3. If your opponent's fighter is a villain or if it's attached to a hero, whatever. I may be backwards on it, but it goes to 0 for 6, and then you can draw 2 cards, and that has played like such a big deal. But I think in regards to that, like I felt the same way as you did in that. I mean, I still liked it for what it was. It's just kind of like GOAT format, like we talked about. Like I like it for what it was, but it leaves a lot to be desired. But we kind of started having those discussions like, well, could we make this like Gateway? Like, what would Gateway look like? And I was real hesitant about that, just because I didn't want to break something that we already just started having fun with, and I didn't know where it was going to lead from that. But I think what really changed my mind on that is that I wanted to build Genkai, and looking at Genkai in Dark Tournament felt really bad. There, I was like, I was looking through for like techniques. I'm like, okay, Desperate Assault, and then I guess I would have to run Death Seeds and Death Trees, and I don't really know. Oh yeah, Rainbow Cyclone, yeah, for sure. Yep. That, but that was really all that we had, and I was like, and the characters, like, you have enough to build a team, right? Like that's it. You have Genkai, you have Taboo Master, and you have Asato Kido, and whatever his name is. What is it, Mitsunari?
Yeah, he's the copycat guy.
Yeah, the copycat guy. Which I've had fun with those characters, by the way, a lot more than I should have. Like, I love playing that Asato Kido from Dark Tournament, and even the Copy Master. I like that whole territory thing. I don't know why. I thought it was cool in the way that you attach these territories to them, and they got like this extra effect while they were attached. And both of them felt like viable at certain times. Like if I have nothing else going on, especially Asato Kido's. But even the Copy Master, like times that felt like I could really like sneak out a win that I probably shouldn't get because of this Copy Master if he's. But really, I mean, the Copy Master was worse because it felt like you could just get around it. You can play around it. Whereas the Sato Kido's not like that. But I remember, I think that's kind of what sold me. I was like, well, I want to build Genkai, and I don't think Dark Tournament is really the place to do it. And I'm still on a mission to build a Genkai Dark Tournament deck right now, just to do it because I want to have it. I don't care how bad it is. As we get into talking more in these videos, people kind of realize like I've kind of like picked my teams that I like, and then for each format, I've just kind of like kept those same teams and gone through what we've done. So I kind of like having like, okay, I have this deck I can play in Dark Tournament in Gateway, and what we ended up on later is in Betrayal. Um, but I kind of like that, having my deck streamlined throughout all the different things so I can just kind of change cards around and play them all the time. But that was when I really think I noticed I want to go to. I was like, okay, well, let's try Gateway. Um, and we got the Winner Circle cards. There was excitement around that because we all remembered the Winner Circle cards. Um, there was a lot of different characters. Um, and I think there was just a lot of things that we wanted to try out that were in that pack that kind of just naturally led us to be like, okay, well, let's give this a shot and see how it goes. And I think from there it was kind of one of the things that we started playing that, and just slowly and slowly it kind of became our new go-to. It was like our new favorite one.
And I think it's important too to just mention, similar to my situation with the orbs for Eurotogi, I can't stress enough, like time had to pass for this change because you and I weren't ready to jump into this format
We had no
until
idea.
we released we had energy releases.
Yeah.
I when I kept talking, we're like, we just need six. We just have to find six,
Yep.
and we can play. We were pretty content with Sakio's lighter and those. And I think at this point we had found a couple of decks here and there because Gateway seems to be probably the most supported old format of Yu Yu Hakusho. So you can find a little bit more information on those decks.
Hmm.
But we definitely like six energy gainers is what you want in a deck. And we were dead set on doing that. We realized very quickly meditation we'd never find. But if we could at least get energy releases.
Yeah.
So I think that was also a bit of the push we needed to go into Gateway because by that point I think we had found our six.
Yeah. And I think kind of to wrap up the conversation for this episode, I think that's a good kind of segue into the next episode that we'll do, is kind of the departure from just playing Dark Tournament into Gateway, and how hard that was to actually get what we needed in those cards, like you just said: energy release, meditation, the
I got something for you.
I got something for you, which for even at this point when we first jumped into Gateway, I still don't think I even knew if that existed by that point. Like we kind of knew about energy release then, and we kind of knew about meditation, but didn't, I don't think, really knew about I got something for you.
That's probably true because we only knew about those two because you wanted to build Genkai.
Yep.
But you had discovered that those cards existed by finding an old Genkai deck that way.
Yep. And I was like, wow, these are crazy. But that's not the only card. Those aren't those are the big ones, and really, really took us some time and a lot of banging our heads against walls and probably annoying everybody we know or came into contact with on eBay or in the Facebook group, just about anywhere that I could talk about the cards, asking them if they had a energy release or a meditation. But not to be denied also in that same statement, Bullseye was a card that seemed at times hard to find, not always, like but it was definitely there. And last but not least is Faces of Sansui.
I was waiting for it.
Yeah.
Oh, and also one that we pretty quickly hopped on, much easier to find, and I think that this is going to be a good segue to discovering Daoshi. Ryzen's Messenger from Gateway. Little bit of a sneak peek, but
Yeah.
Gateway's our primary format at this point. But we don't really play Gateway.
Mm-hmm.
We play those first 3 sets. We've made modifications and banned things and allowed things into the format. But a lot of what we're talking about right now is why we had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of started necessity first and then became more for balancing later.
I remember, this is a great way to end it, and I think next episode we'll talk about Gateway, all these cards and what it was like finding them, the energy releases, the meditations, we're still on the search for some of those too, the faces, the bullseyes, things like that, but I never have had as much disdain for a character until Daoshi made his way in. And I don't want to spoil that because I could talk about how much I hate Daoshi probably for a full half hour. Easily more probably, I guess, really. Because me and you have went back and forth on why I hate him and why you don't hate him but also hate him. And just how annoying of a card that is to play against, and what it kind of did to the format when we just started straight up playing Gateway, and the natural progression of what happened after the discovery of Daoshi.
Yeah. We'll save it for another time, but
yep.
There are a lot of things that we learned when we started to and expanded our play group too. That was a factor of it as well.
Yeah, definitely. We upped the play group to 3 people, and that made a big change. And there was a lot of frustration there that we didn't realize, and some that we still deal with that I think we can talk about in that episode next time. But I was about to say tune in next time on Yu Yu Hakusho, but
don't do that.
I'm not going to do that. That would have been funny, though. It just kind of pops in my head. But yeah, we'll talk about that on next episode that hopefully we can make some time next week. And, I would think if we can, we'll have that episode and maybe like do a little showcase of we talked about all this dark tournament stuff, like maybe do like a little deck breakdown of one of your dark tournament decks and one of mine before we kind of just fully leave it in the past and really dive into Gateway. We can do like one video of like, hey, this is talking about these dark tournament decks, kind of showing them off and what we did and what we thought is the best way and some of the cards, that kind of stuff. And then we'll have one of like talking about what it was like jumping into Gateway.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think I still have some put together for your Togies.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks for watching, everybody, and hopefully we'll have a